Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a music chat that I've been wanting to do for ages. Absolutely ages. I know it's been keeping you awake at night, just like it keeps me awake at night. I'm talking about Hindemith's Symphonic Metamorphosis of Themes by Carl Maria von Weber. That's the whole title. It's ridiculous. One of those long German titles. It's much better to just call it Hindemith's Symphonic Metamorphosis, or, if you want to be technical, the Symphonic Metamorphosis on Themes by Weber. That's enough. But here's the issue. Haven't you ever wondered where those themes came from? Like where in Weber? Because nobody really listens to Weber anymore, aside from Der Freischütz and the overture to Der Freischütz and some other Weber overtures. Orianthe gets played once in a while, that kind of stuff, Oberon. But essentially, Weber as an instrumental music composer no longer exists for us in our musical culture. And it's really a shame, because he wrote wonderful, brilliant instrumental music, especially for the keyboard, piano music. I mean, his Concertstück gets played once in a while, for piano and orchestra, which is a wonderful work. But basically, there's very little. And so we know that Hindemith looked to basically, 3 or 4 pieces by Weber. There was his overture to the play Turandot, which he borrowed the same Chinese theme that Weber uses, and we'll hear a bit of that. But the rest of the material for the Symphonic Metamorphosis came from Weber's music for piano 4 hands. And even among composers who are really well known, like Mozart and Schubert, the music for piano 4 hands is a niche. It's a secondary consideration most of the time, which is a pity, because these composers wrote magnificent music for piano 4 hands, and Weber's music for piano 4 hands is wonderful if you can find it. Of course, if you play the piano and you happen to have 4 hands, you're in business. Or you have a friend, maybe if two of you only have 2 hands each. Here's the problem, though. I don't play. I only have 2 hands, and my piano playing was always horrible, and I gave it up when I was younger. So that was that. And I can't go find the music and play it myself. So what do I do? And not only that, the Weber music for piano 4 hands doesn't say, here's the part that Hindemith used. So of course you want to look at a recording. That's how I operate. I listen to recordings. And because I'm a music critic, I get recordings, usually millions of recordings. But Weber's piano music 4 hands, even in today's cockamamie, nutty CD world, you do not see recordings of Weber's 4-hand piano music flying out of wherever these things come from. There were a couple versions on CD, but they were really bad. They were on very obscure, tiny labels, and they were CD transfers of old mono recordings. I mean, they were just awful. Not mono, old stereo recordings. It doesn't matter. They were bad, and they're gone. They're totally gone. But then the heavens opened, the skies parted, and out came this from Hensler and SWR, Südwestfunk, in Germany, this absolutely first-class collection of all of Weber's 4-hand piano music played by the Duo d'Accord, and they are absolutely terrific. Terrific! Wonderful! I love the Duo d'Accord. Thank you for making this, because now we have the material for 3 of the 4 movements of Hindemith's Symphonic Metamorphosis, and I'm going to play it for you, because just like that review I did of the Gallo trio sonatas that Stravinsky used for Pulcinella, we saw how Stravinsky adapted the music for Pulcinella. We heard as well as saw. We're going to hear what Hindemith did to the original material composed by Weber. And it's really, really fascinating. It really is. And the most fascinating thing about it is that he didn't have to do much at all. It's amazing. You play that work and it sounds like Hindemith. It really sounds like Hindemith. But then you play the Weber and it sounds like Hindemith. Well, not always. Hindemith had to do very, very little. But what he did do shows you just where the kinks in the chain are, the bits that need to be manipulated to give it that characteristically contemporary sound. So I have everything laid out here. I have the Duo d'Accord, complete Weber 4-hand piano music. I have the Hindemith Symphonic Metamorphosis on Naxos, This is the recording with the New Zealand Symphony under Franz Paul Decker, which is excellent. And I have the Turandot Overture, which is also on Naxos, which is the Queensland Philharmonic Orchestra under John, let's see, who is this? John Georgiadis. And that's all we need. We have everything we need. So without further ado, let's begin with the first movement of the Hindemith Symphonic Metamorphosis. Now, it's kind of a march-like thing, this first movement, and it has vaguely kind of exotic, maybe Turkish march quality to it, but I never associated it with the music of Weber, who was one of those early romantics, late classical guys. But sure enough, if you look at his 8 pieces, Opus 60, 8 pieces, Opus 60, for piano, 4 hands, and you look at the fourth of them, which is simply marked Allegro tutto ben marcato, this is what you hear. Pretty cool, huh? Now, let's listen. I'll take the booklet here so I can flip this stuff around. Now, let's listen to Hindemith's version of that. Pretty nifty, huh? What did Hindemith do? I mean, there are some changes in internal repeats of sections and things, but other than that, he played a little bit with the accompanying harmonies. He upped the level of dissonance a bit to spice it up somewhat. But basically, it's the same thing that Weber wrote. He just orchestrated it. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful that Weber wrote this and that Hindemith was able to turn it into something Hindemithy without too much effort, without too much work. And I think in some of these pieces, when composers update the work of others, the genius is in knowing what not to do, when to just leave it alone and let it be itself. You have to know how to pick them. That's what Katharine Hepburn told Peter O'Toole when his movie career was in the doldrums. She always said, you got to know how to pick them. And Hindemith knew how to pick them. He got the right pieces from Weber. Now, the second movement is the fabulous Turandot Scherzo. And this is all based, both the Weber and the Hindemith are based on the same allegedly Chinese tune. And that tune is, da ba da dum bum ba da 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 or something like that. Here's Weber's version of it. Wait a second, let me get that booklet out. Okay, here's Weber's version of the Turandot theme. Okay, and now here's Hindemith's in his Turandot Scherzo. Hindemith basically takes the tune, he repeats both sections, he makes it A, A, B, B, and varies the scoring of all of the repeats, the internal repeats, and then builds up this huge crescendo as the tune passes from one section of the orchestra to the other, accompanied by scales and trills that become wilder and wilder and more dissonant as it goes. He fully modernizes the whole thing. And also you'll notice that the harmonic scheme of the theme is a little bit different. Hindemith changes just a couple of notes from the Weber original so that the tune sounds somewhat more exotic than it does when Weber uses it. Weber kind of westernizes it more than Hindemith does, who prefers to leave it in its original form, or if not in its original form, create a fake original form that sounds more exotic than Weber's. Now the third movement comes from Weber's, let's see what that is. It's also his Opus 10. And in this case, it's 6 pieces, Opus 10 for piano 4 hands. And this one is the second movement. It's the Andantino con moto. And I'm not going to play the beginning of it because it's an ABA piece. And Hindemith basically uses the entire piece, the ABA form. But I want to play the B section, the central section. Because in this case, in my opinion anyway, Weber's piece sounds rather conventional harmonically. It really is a sort of typical light salon-like, late classical, early romantic tune. But what Hindemith does with it is quite extraordinary. So let's listen first to Weber's original. And now, let's listen to how Hindemith treats it. Isn't that beautiful? Doesn't he make it sort of warmly romantic and totally different from that tinkly salon character it had with Weber? In Hindemith's hands, it becomes a really soulful cantabile melody. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? But it's the same tune. It's recognizably the same tune. And he achieves this just by changing the harmony and the accompaniment very slightly. Now, the last movement of the Hindemith is a march. It's a march with a trio section in the middle. Now, marches tend also to be in ABA forms, or A and then a contrasting something. And that contrasting something, whether it's a middle section or another tune entirely, is called a trio. And there's no reason that these things are called trios because they have nothing to do with the number 3. But it's called a trio. And the Hindemith march and the Weber march are virtually identical. It's quite amazing. So here is Weber's original. Hang on, there's a booklet. There you go. And once again, here is Hindemith's version of the march. Now, I want you to hear the trio section, because in this case, what Hindemith has done is he's preserved the original trio that Weber wrote, but it has a totally different character. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating how Hindemith does it. Let me just play you. It's easier to hear it than it is to describe it, but I'll try and describe it anyway later. Listen to Weber's original. And now listen to Hindemith. Now forget for a moment the fact that the tune, as it progresses in Hindemith's version, becomes more dissonant and more sort of modern sounding. The fact of the matter is, Weber's version is quite relaxed, very dreamy. I mean, it's almost hypnotic. It has this. It's a beautiful tune, but there's something very, very sweet and almost, I wouldn't say impressionistic, but it's a hazy kind of theme. It's treated as if from a distance. Hindemith's just the opposite. Hindemith's version of it is actually more energetic than the march is. I mean, the march itself is a somewhat glum, kind of dogged march tune, and he turns the trio section into this heroic, triumphant strain. Of course, it's going to come back at the end of the whole work and end it with high triumph and scenes of victory, and it's a grand march. Not in Weber's hands at all. And Hindemith achieves this really simply by orchestration. The tune is the same, the accompaniment is the same. I mean, eventually the tune, because it gets repeated a lot more in Hindemith than it does in Weber, it gets embellished with extra dissonance, but it's all just a function of dynamics and tempo and the scoring. And the scoring, those chattering woodwinds, the French horns, making such a bold statement out of it. The brass always get the tune. It's marvelous. It's just marvelous. And it's so different from what Weber wrote. But now you know exactly what Hindemith did and what Weber originally wrote. And if you can, I checked before I did this particular chat to make sure. This guy is still available. It's not expensive. It's a 2-disc set. It's marvelous. If you're looking for Weber's music for piano 4 hands, this is just about the only show in town. And it's absolutely splendid. So with the duo d'accord, and I recommend it as strongly as I possibly can. The Hindemith works, of course, you can find on your own. And, we talked about some of them already, some Hindemith pieces, and we'll talk about more. We did Mathis der Maler, and this was one of the discs that some of you mentioned that wasn't in my top pile of Mathis der Malers. It should have been, I have to say, because it's an excellent recording. This recording with Franz Paul Decker and the New Zealand Symphony. I hope this has given you some insight into how one composer is able to create something incredibly fresh and new based on the work of another composer without having to do all that much to it. I was so happy when I got this music. I was so happy to hear this because it fascinates me. It just fascinates me. Music it's a malleable substance. And when a genius gets his hands on the works of another genius, wonderful things can happen. And that's why we have to keep on listening. So thank you for joining me for this little chat. I hope you found it intriguing. Take care.